Um, and it is my pleasure to introduce you with the moderator of the session, Alvaro Samayoa. Alvaro is an independent consultant with experience in trade and industry, including work in the private sector in Africa, Mesoamerica, and the EU, as well as in the public sector in Guatemala, where he worked to promote the competitiveness of forestry services. This has been achieved by improving the technology and introducing new processes which have strengthened the supply chain traceability and helped with the legal verification and monitoring biodiversity. Currently, Alvaro works as an independent consultant. He has worked with organizations like the EU, DEFRA UK, FAO, and USAID, and Latin America's timber tracking and trade and industry socioeconomic projects. So I'm going to pass you over to Alvaro. We're going to do some adjustments.
Yeah, it's perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, welcome to the last and final panel of the day, or I will say the main panel, just to promote it a little bit better. But yeah, great. Sorry about that. It's better?
I think so. Why don't you pull this out?
Yeah, like this. Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, today we're going to be talking to you about traceability systems, and well, it's great to be here after the pandemic, and it's great after I will say the last time that we were here that we were presenting what a traceability system was. And basically it was around 7, 8 years ago, we were talking about what a traceability system was and what is it for, and probably half or more of the audience was not trying to understand what it was. Now for us, it's kind of like interesting to have this conversation of what a traceability system can do. And this panel will, that's what the panel will be for. We're going to be talking about the results that have been around all over the years that have been gathering data, and we will be talking about the positive results, the negative, and as well things that we can change, like IT, programming, legislations in each country, and even the trade. How can the system can change the trade? So for this panel, opens the discussion of the legality assurance systems, or another tool for green laundry machines. As well, it will, the traceability systems will give the question of if there enables or barriers for legislations, or what type of data or information should be shared. So for this panel, we will be having 5 presenters, and first it will be, I think it's Tobias. And I'll read his bio. Tobias has conducted a research on public and private governance of forest-based supply chains for the Forest Legality Initiative since 2016. He has conducted fieldwork on traceability systems in Guatemala, Peru, Brazil, and Indonesia. He's trained cabinet maker with engineering degree in wood processing and master degree in international management forest industry, sorry. He's an experienced auditor and accredited manager for FSC PFC, and currently works with GTS Global Traceability Solutions as a project and team manager. Tobias.
Thank you. Thank you, Alvaro, for the introduction. So I'm Tobias Stäuble, and I'm going to present a summary of the work on traceability systems that we've done with the Forest Legality Initiative today. So we started to work on this topic more or less in 2015, and it's always been an explorative work. Our objective was always to learn from the key stakeholder groups what the systems are and how they are perceived. So basically, our approach was to observe the design, the implementation, and also the operation of traceability systems. And the research questions we would bring into the field would center around topics like user friendliness, the cost of the system, the functionalities, and also their ability to prevent fraud or also unintentional error in the system. We also always had a focus on the role of technology within the systems, and the technologies would comprise, general data management, the kinds of marking and identification technology that's used for different materials, the methods of data collection and reporting, the role of remote sensing within these systems, and also things like GPS tracking and, of course, forensic wood ID. We have published earlier this year, together with FAO, already a series of country case studies in Latin America. Maybe some of you already took notice of this publication. And we are planning to have another publication this year where we translate the core findings into a more general practical framework for government-owned traceability systems. So summary, these are the countries that we've been working in and that are featured in the joint FAO publication. The FLI, Forest Legality Initiative case studies were conducted in Brazil with fieldwork mostly in 2017, which at the time where there were still several systems on state level and federal level in operation. And I think it's still a great country to study traceability systems just because of the fact that there are several systems operational with different at different stages of development, so to say. We also worked in Guatemala, and we will have a separate presentation on the Guatemala system today. I think it's still it's a good example for a system that comprises a wide range of processing industry as well. So some systems focus on sawn wood only, and Guatemala is really quite comprehensive regarding the supply chain scope. And we also did fieldwork in Peru in 2016 and 17 mostly, at a time where there was a lot of dynamic in the development and implementation of the national system there. And we had great opportunity to learn also about the challenges in these process stages. So some key results from all this work I want to highlight here. So one of the first things we had to learn is that when we discuss traceability, we usually have this quite simple linear supply chain in mind, but the reality of the forest sector is actually different. Now, it's a quite complex supply chain network, and specifically on the level of primary processing, there are horizontal material flows of byproducts, co-products. There are mills that will source roundwood only, that would be typically a sawmill or a plywood mill, but there's also processing industry that takes in other inputs like wood chips, sawdust, pulp. And this, and once you understand these processes, you also understand that there are limitations to attainable level of traceability. And this is something we should never forget when we have this discussion on this topic. Another thing we found is that the state-of-the-art traceability systems operated by governments or by authorities nowadays basically all follow the same architecture, which is this generic traceability system design. So once you have identified or defined the resource scope and the supply chain scope of the system, you will also define what kind of information will be captured in the system. So it's typically information on volumes, on the origin and species of the material. But that can be, of course, at different levels of granularity, depending on the objectives and the scope of the system. And then typically the information is reported to a database directly, mostly by the private sector. So in some cases it's reported and it's captured by public servants, but an increasingly large share is reported directly by the private sector actors. And these databases then basically function as a central ledger for roundwood equivalents. So if you harvest a cubic meter of roundwood, you will make sure with this ledger that it can only be spent or processed once, not throughout the chain. And then there is an additional layer of monitoring and verification activities that is typically carried out by the authority that also owns the system. And this comprises various activities that can be pre-harvest inspections in the field, post-harvest inspections, can also make use of remote sensing methodologies. It can be road checks, or it can be forensic wood ID along the whole supply chain. And this is based on samples because you can't be comprehensive there. You cannot verify every tree that has been harvested, but it is to ensure the integrity of the system. We also compiled this rather comprehensive list of stakeholders involved in designing and implementing and operating traceability systems. And it became also pretty clear that the private sector is very important. To have them on board embracing a system will also strengthen it. So maybe we can do a quick survey. How many forest industry, forest owners, or wood processing industry representatives are here today? Can you raise your hand? So not many. So we would not make a good team to design a traceability system. Okay. Good. Okay. So and eventually we cast all those findings into this framework that is structured along phases. So the planning phase, implementation, and upkeep, and then we described the core issues that you should take into account at each step of this process. And this will be, so this is the general content of our upcoming publication on this topic. I have a couple more findings or learnings, takeaways from all this work that we've done. When we started this work in these meetings, people used to say, the people are smarter than the systems. It's really easy to circumvent them. So the traceability systems, they don't really work. I would say for some part that's still true, but there also have been improvements. And I would say the nowadays state-of-the-art systems are more difficult to circumvent, especially without collaboration from the authority that owns the system. So that has become more difficult than it used to be. But of course, when the owners of the system manipulate the system, then they will fail. So in that sense, traceability systems are not a tool to address root causes of illegal logging or corruption, these kind of things. However, we have also learned when they are used as intended, they can facilitate the identification and also the prevention of illegal logging. So it's been said in some panels these days that the systems are flawed and they don't function properly. And I would say in many cases the systems per se function. It's just the people who are using them don't use them the way they should use them. So that is the larger part of the problem. And in any case, they gather a lot of valuable information, data that we can work with, and we can learn what's going on in the sector. So it's for sure helpful. For the outlook, I think with all this fundamental work that has been carried out and many systems in place nowadays, we can really move on with starting to measure the performance of the systems, the effects, and also the impact for future research on traceability systems. And in the light of upcoming regulations, I think more than ever, we should also seek exchange with other sectors We should look into how does traceability work in the food sector, also and other deforestation related commodities, obviously. And also in that context, I think there's more than ever, there's also a need for transnational systems because our supply chains are global. And if we want to comply with a law like the EUDR, we also need global traceability systems. Thank you for your attention, and looking forward for the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Tobias, for your presentation. And I think this goes as well with what we were talking today in the morning in panels of regulations and in the IT. So, and as well, a really good point when it comes to we should bring the private sector into this conversation and for them to be more involved in this type of initiatives. For our next presenter, it will be, is it Luis? Yeah, so sorry. It will be Luis Sine. Luis Sine is the Director of Technology Unit of the National Forest Service in Guatemala, INAV. He is responsible for coordinating institutional activities to automatize processes to decentralize INAV forest management services through technology innovation. Luis has a bachelor's degree in informatics and a PhD in information management systems. As well, Luis has worked since the beginning of the system and in creating and designing the system. And so he has seen this system grow since from the beginning. So Luis, we'll let you the presentation. We'll let you start with the presentation.
Muy buenas, gusto de saludarles. La verdad, para mí es un gusto estar participando en este panel juntamente con
It's a pleasure to greet you all and to participate in this panel. I will put up my presentation.
Solo si me pueden confirmar que pueden visualizar por ahí.
Could you please confirm that my presentation is, that you can view my presentation? Thank you. The topic today that I'm going to address today is the traceability system that we put in place in Guatemala. Our experience started in February 2014, when we were told that we should initiate a traceability system to control everything that was happening in forests, especially as regards the sale of forest products. We had no control prior to that time. We used to control this based on invoices that were submitted to us, and it was all managed by industry itself. We had no control. So I'd like to show you that we have a whole chain that we are working on. So in Guatemala, we have the raw materials coming from protected areas or from outside protected areas. I work with an institution that represents materials extracted from outside protected areas, but at INABI, we are responsible for controlling and inspecting everything that happens in the forest industry. So we have this role, the institution has this role, this mandate. So we have two systems here. We have one that became quite known in Latin America, the SIGNET. I will I will show it here. The CNF became well known throughout Latin America based on Guatemala's experience. We had nothing systematized or automated in the beginning. So we began with the CNF, where we recorded all the entries and exits of materials, the inflow and outflow, everything coming from a forest, from protected areas or outside protected areas. So everything came through this and from concessions. That's why there was this management, but all the products came into the industry, and we had a traceability system controlling everything coming in, then going out through transport and all the documents, export documents, or transportation to other industries or to final consumers. And so we have the whole chain systematized. We have the SEGIFOR system that controls the flow from the forest, going through all these initial processes and evaluating extraction, replanting, transportation, industry, and all these steps. And so we have the complete cycle now that we are working with after a year and a half of implementation of the complete cycle from the forest to the industry, because previously we had only some transportation documents, what was coming in from the industry, but we didn't have the complete cycle. So after all these years, I'd like to point out that in our institution, in order to make this work a reality, we had to address, and well, this was not voluntary. It was an adaptation with the forest law. So we actually updated existing regulation, and 3 tools made it obligatory to put in place an IT system for traceability, because there was a previous system, but the system was kind of manual, it wasn't automatic. And so today we can say that this IT system has actually made things much easier. And we had also to certify the technical staff of the institution and train them, because when you implement a system, upon implementing the system, we could see clearly that all units should be involved. And so we needed to develop internal capacity so that the 35 sub-regions of the territory might very quickly be able to use the system. So we trained our staff and also the police and local authorities. There are nature protection authorities and divisions within the police that address nature issues. And so they were all trained to keep track of forest products. And so they review the bills, and they also help support traceability. We also had experiences and exchanges with other countries. So we have here in the photograph colleagues from Honduras. And this is another issue that we have. So before 2014, all the information that we had, and as the institution that should have forest control, until 2014, we didn't have data, very little data. It was universities, academia that provided data. But now we provide data to universities. And so you see here the number of notes and or actually documents that are equivalent to almost 740,000 square meters of product. And so there's been a huge increase along the years and since 2014. And so we've been working with 200 major companies as allies to help us do the work, because we wanted to decrease the number of those who were opposed to implementation of the system. And so all this helped us greatly. And we relied on 200 companies initially. Today, we have many more. At the end of 2014, we had more than 1,500 companies enrolled and participating in the initiative. In 2015, we had over 1 million cubic meters registered in the system. And so all this was extracted from forests and taken to the industry for different purposes. It's a huge volume, more than 1 million cubic meters. And this grew in subsequent years. So we see here sharp rise in 2017, and you see here a gradual decrease during the pandemic. In 2021, slight increase again. And so the institution needed to enter certain agreements allowing for transportation because the economy couldn't be completely paralyzed. And so in 2021, we had a slight increase. And so for 2022, we have data for the first quarter. So it's not updated, but it allows us to draw some conclusions. We have more than 660,000 cubic meters. And so by the end of the year, we should have double this figure. And so the data is updated until March 2022. So we see that there is traceability of more than 11 million, almost 12 million cubic meters.
So you can see here from the different year to year what we've been able to catalog. And here I would highlight what happened during the pandemic. We have a lot of data related to experts, the kind of product, and according to the product you have logged timber, we have what kind of wood it was, what kind of species that were used. We have other data here, for instance, how much wood was the quantity of wood, the kind of wood. We can even do the top 10 of what is being used in the industry, and in terms of internal trade. We also have pallets, we have chip, we have different forms, different use. And all the data that are being used, and we have the data, and we have an important map here on the right that shows the quantity of the number of industries that are registered in the whole country. All of this was reached based on what was done. And I would just like to highlight that now we have very important data available, and we also find information. We also find moments where we need to improve, but this makes us work more. We need more investments. And as it was said in the previous presentation, the system is just a tool. It is always, and whenever we have a new tool, there's always the traps, there's always hardships, the ways of going around the norm, the law. So this is a system that allows us to have more control. We have weak points, of course, but these are weak points that need to be improved upon. But nevertheless, we would highlight that the system as a whole allows us to have a traceability and allows us to find our mistakes and our weak points, and it allows us to improve or even reduce the cubic meter by according to the kind of wood. Another point that could be improved has to do with the need and the desire that we have of adapt this to app use, so apps, phone apps, to do this kind of work using our phones, to control this with our phones. So inside this system, this traceability systems, these are things that are here to improve. It doesn't mean that the system will be 100% perfect. The system is a tool that is useful. We have had a few cases where there were errors, and we always want to improve day to day, and that's our plan. This is what a plan is for us to dialogue about the benefits, about the situations that can be improved upon. And to end, if you guys notice here, let me just go back a little bit. Look at the numbers that were sent of invoices. So this responds to 700,000 cubic meters, and they represent $1 for every invoice. So 50 cents is the cost of the invoice for us. So we have these values now, and we want to make the system self-sufficient. 50% of the value is the cost that the institution did not receive before, but now it is part of a fund, a common fund that we have. And this helps to strengthen the system. These are things that we learned throughout the process, and now we just want to perfect this. We want to improve this. We have over 100 million cubic meters and over $6 million of investment for our capacity building to improve infrastructure. So there are many things that are now allows us to go against the tide. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Luis. Very interesting presentation, and I bet that we can talk about the system all afternoon. Very interesting, the topic that you said about the sustainability of the system and how you can get some income out of it. That's something that there should be more talk out of it in order to strengthen systems and make them more sustainable. Other points that you mentioned was that it came really interesting. The system is not voluntary. It came with legislations and laws, and that's something that should be pointed out as well. And it's really interesting to see as well all that information, data that it has come from since 2014, where you can analyze the forest products and industries, and you cannot just see the system just as a legislation or a fiscalization, but you can as well see the system as how pure it is, as an information, as a data for trade, something positive. Okay, so for our next presenter, it will be David Gehl. He's a manager in traceability and technologies, environmental in the AI of US. David is responsible for developing and implementing strategies to further the development of policies and technologies to bring transparency and traceability, to halt illegal logging and associate trade. In addition, he manages the AI US for his team work in Eastern Europe. And since joined in AI in 2011, David has coordinated investigate work around the world on illegal logging and HFCs, gathering analysis and processing evidence, and drafting and presenting policies recommendations for multiple audiences. David, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Gehl with the Environmental Investigation Agency, US. So today I'll be presenting on Gabon's SNTBG. That's a transparent timber traceability system that EI has developed in coordination with the government of Gabon over the past 3 years. So, there we go. So EIA, as many of you know, we're a campaigning organization. We do investigations into illegal logging around the world and try to find out what's going wrong and try to fix the loopholes that we find. So you might ask, why are we talking about building a traceability system? And the reason for that is because we see around the world one of the biggest problems with illegal logging is that it's easy to launder. It's easy to launder because around the world, the status quo is really paper permits. And the paper permits are just widely open to fraud. So we saw there was a need for these traceability systems. And we saw also over more than a decade that a number of initiatives that sought out to make a comprehensive national traceability system went in there with tens of millions of dollars and sought to make like the best system possible with all the bells and whistles. And it takes many years to do that. And we saw that after years of development, the moment of political will had disappeared in the country, and the government maybe no longer wanted that system that had been built. And so our vision was to create an open source timber traceability system that we could share with any government who wanted it, where there was a moment of political will, and work with them and adapt the system quickly and implement it in that country. So that's what we've achieved in Gabon. I'll take one step back and just talk about Romania, because Romania was kind of the genesis for this idea. EIA has done investigations in Romania for over a decade. And we saw that in Romania, it's a European Union country, but by many estimates, over half of the logging done in Romania is illegal. And so there's serious problems with corruption. Romania created a timber traceability system in 2014 called SUMAL. And then in 2016, something very interesting happened. There was a technocratic government following some scandals, and there was this movement, and we were able to engage with that government, and they created a forest inspector, and that's just a public window into the government, closed government traceability system. And what that meant is that in the SUMAL system, there is a mobile app-based transport document. So before a log truck carries timber, they just have to fill out a permit on a mobile app. And that permit, they hit send, and that goes to the central database. Now with the forest inspector, that data is available not just to government officials, but also to the public in real time. So as the truck drives, any citizen in Romania, talking about stakeholders, this is like the broadest sense of stakeholders, anyone with a cell phone can type in the license plate number of the truck and get an answer. Is it legal or illegal? And what they saw was within 3 months of the public system going live, the number of transport permits being requested increased by 60%. So we saw the big jump happen, not when they created a government traceability system, but when they made that public in real time. So the public can really engage in that. Another important lesson learned from Romania was that in 2017, the government changed. For 3 years, the next government tried to kill off the system. So they sort of throttled access to it. They'd sort of, they stopped paying the developers. And for 3 years, each time they did that, there were public protests and there were online petitions, and the system stayed alive. In 2019, there was another government. That government created a SUMAL 2.0. They expanded the scope of the system to include harvesting, include private forests. And in 2021, there was a new SUMAL 2.0 with an expanded transparency. So now you can see, what you see in the map, you can see the full track of a truck, not where it started its journey, not just where it started, but also where it delivered the wood to. But it's important to say the law in Romania requires about twice as much transparency as the current system provides. So that's still something that Romanian activists are really pushing hard on the government to expand it to the legal, where it should be according to the law. So in Gabon, EIA conducted an investigation there. We've presented on this a number of years ago, I think back in 2018. And what we found was large amounts of bribery in the forest sector, for access to concessions, a lot of over harvesting within the concessions, and a number of other illegalities. Together with that, there was in 2019 a scandal called Cavazingo Gate. Cavazingo is a very precious wood in Gabon. It's illegal to be harvested. The government had seized 300 containers worth of illegal wood, or actual containers of illegal wood. And in 2019, they just kind of went missing from the government stocks. And this was a huge scandal. And in the end, the vice president was sacked, the minister of environment was sacked, and there was a new government. And so the new minister, Lee White, the new minister of environment, came to EIA and said, okay, you guys told us what our problems are. What do you want to do about it? And we started working with them and developing this traceability system. So that's what we've been doing over the past 3 years. The system is now called the SNTBG, the Système de Traçabilité du Bois de Gabon. We have built it as an open source software with Code for Nature, who you might have seen present also 3 or 4 years ago about the Romanian system. It's an NGO formed of some of the developers of the Romanian Forest Inspector, and working closely with the government. Basically, it's just a digitization of the Gabonese forest sector, paper permitting system. It's Android smartphone based. It functions offline. And there is a public geoportal with differentiated access for government, for companies, for the public. And again, our goal with this project is create this open source software so that we can make digital, transparent, and traceable supply chains easy, cheap, and universal. So I'll show you some screens from the system. So this is government side showing the supply chain. So same as we saw in the previous presentations, the system covers everything from the inventory of the standing trees in the forest all the way through to the export of the timber. Our system for getting the data in is a mobile application with 8 modules, and each of these modules covers a different step in the timber supply chain. So first you have an inventory of the standing trees in the forest with a mobile app. So each tree has time, date, stamp, GPS coordinates of the exact tree where it stands in the forest. When that tree is cut, there's the next permit, the harvest permit. And so you register this tree that was standing here is now cut. It's a fallen tree. And then you follow that through the supply chain, the transport, the transformation, and then finally to export. So this is an image of the mobile application, the screen you get with the mobile application, you see all the modules, the 8 modules. And on the screen here, you see, so after you make a transport permit, so before a truck driver starts his or her journey, types in all the information as they do with a paper permit, and they get this sort of PDF on their phone. And the PDF has a QR code. And so this is how the system functions offline. So the truck driver or the concession manager can make the permit. Truck driver scans that permit with their cell phone, scans the QR code, and that's a digital transfer of the permit to the truck driver. Truck driver drives, gets to a control post officer scans the QR code, gets that information, checks it against what's on the truck, delivers the timber, sawmill manager scans the QR code, and you have that handoff there. And all of that can function completely offline when one of those actors is within sort of, cell phone or Wi-Fi reception, that gets uploaded to the central database. And so then the government sees that, the government gets that information in real time. So now I'm going to show you a few slides from the actual geoportal for the system. So the geoportal allows you to see all the information from the system. So what we're looking at here is in purple, the concession boundaries, and in orange, the AAC boundaries. It's not really lined up here, but basically the AAC boundary in orange, that's an annual allowable cut area. That's the area that you're allowed to cut in a certain year. And so with that data, then you can click on one of those AACs and you can say, see the trees, and you get this. And this is a digital inventory that was conducted about 4 months ago in Gabon, where they went and did their inventory, walking through the forest and selecting, this okume tree will be cut. And with each tree, they took the mobile phone, entered the information from the tree, registered, took time, date, stamp, and now that's available in the geoportal. So you can see the exact GPS coordinates of every tree that will be cut in the system. When the transport happens, then you fill out the timber permit, and this is the information you get. You get a PDF. You can print that out, and that's exactly the same information as in a timber transport permit. But we added 3 photos. So just like Romanian system, before the transport starts, you have to take a picture of the front, the side, and the back of the truck. And those images are available in the geoportal. And it records the track of the truck from start to finish. So you can see, did the truck take a detour? Did it drop off its timber somewhere? You can see that on the map. When the truck then arrives, there's a stocks module to record all the logs in a processing facility. And then there's a registration of the finished products, the pallets of finished products. Important to note here that there isn't direct traceability at the point of processing. So the traceability is lost. That's, what we're doing is digitizing Gabonese law. Gabonese law does not require that traceability through it, but that is an important thing that we really need to be able to add to the system, and that to be able to get that traceability from log to sawn board or to veneer sheets. That component of added traceability is really critical. But what we do have is the traceability, from then the pallets, each of the pallets, onto the end user, the export. And so when those pallets are loaded into a container, there's the final permit in the system. And it's important to note that that final permit, you type in the container number. So you look at a container, there's 7 digits on the side of a container. You type those in, and that's in the system in the permit. And here's just an example from the system. You can see circled container number. That container number, you can look into like tracktrace.com, open websites, and find out the journey of that container, where that container went afterwards. So this is just one example I pulled up in the system, and you can see it left Libreville and went on to Lomé and on, I think, to China in this case. So that's really important. If you look at like Piers or Panjiva data for US imports, there's often a container number. So that can be a really important linkage between the Gabonese traceability system and other trade data. And just to show, you can do statistics with the system, and we're developing a sort of second generation of the geoportal to do this more smoothly. And importantly, thinking about the last panel, we've added an API to GLAD alerts, to RAD alerts, and to the NICFI Planet Labs monthly mosaics. And so you can see all that traceability data overlaid, with the deforestation alerts and the high resolution, the 3-meter image, most recent monthly cloud-free mosaic imagery from Planet Labs. So my final slide here. So in Gabon, we've been working for the past 1.5 years on piloting the system in the field. And now we're working with the government, and the government is intending to launch the phased implementation of the system starting in January of 2023. There'll be a gradual implementation over a series of months, and sort of gradually in different provinces expanding the system. And for EIA, I will also say that, as I said in the beginning, our intent was to create an open source traceability system. We've built the system in a modular fashion so that, it's a complete system, but it's lots of modules. So if Guatemala, for example, wanted the timber transport module, we could just give that to Guatemala, work with Guatemala, and adapt that into the Guatemalan system and adapt that. So we're very open to working with any other countries, or, if there are any opportunities, please contact us, and we're very happy to talk and interested in new opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. This is really interesting presentation, especially because for the past couple of years, we have been talking about systems, and this is an example of how the system can start develop instead of just passing from paper-based to electronic system. Now we can talk about QR and live monitoring of the packet. So it's really interesting. And thank you for sharing, and the open source information that as well can help other countries. Okay, so for our last presenter, before the happy hour, and well, the questions and then happy hour, but it's Ulrich Malessa, is a forester and a sustainable business administrator by training. Uli is an expert on timber trade and timber trade control and certification, as well as a natural resources policy making and governance. Uli has work experience in Africa, Latin America, and as well in North America and Europe. He's a senior advisor for FSC Germany and Robert for FSC International. He's currently based in Guatemala. He works on a freelance expert on sustainable forest management, wildlife and use, and trade control. One Health approach and proposal writing for Selva Maya program for GIZ. And on the TLAS assessment framework for WWF US and as assessment lectures. He is teaching at the University of Freiburg. Uli, he's online and oh, there he is. So thank you, Uli.
Thank you very much. So I hope this is technically working. I will also instantly share my screen. And I hope it's doing it. Do you see my screen? Can somebody tell me yes, everything okay?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Perfect. Yes, we also have here in the group virtually my colleague Iola Leal, and she will contribute later on the panel. We are a group of experts. You see our names here on the screen, asked by the TNRC project, Tackling Nature Resource Corruption project by WWF US to undertake this study. So to develop an assessment framework for timber legality assurance systems. We have done this job and we can present now our findings and a little bit of the outcomes. So this is the description of what we are asked to do. And the goal was to develop a concept for a public-facing, maintained and impactful place to go to learn about timber legality assurance systems. And the need statements behind that was that there is a need to have a comprehensive overview of how and where different TLAS approaches are being applied and to what degree of success. Also, in easy access to more in-depth information about successful or promising TLAS approaches. Overall, the idea, the understanding was, or the situation is that there is no place where you can quickly see and learn how the different systems in individual countries are working. So, first of all, we defined what is a timber legality assurance system. And that's a bit broader than just talking about a traceability system. So here's our supply chain, again, as Tobias mentioned earlier, simplified. So we have a component, an element that encompasses all the supply chain control and verification mechanisms. You see always here now the definition with small letters. We have a definition of what is legal wood. We also have a mechanism to ensure transparency and stakeholder involvement. There should be attached a mechanism to enforce things if they go wrong, so regarding the non-compliances. Another element for a complete and comprehensive TLAS is government oversight, so to make sure that the overall system runs well and issues are identified and dealt with. And finally, also policy response. So the lawmaker should know about the outcomes, and maybe this can also all put together into a forest action plan. Timber legality statement not necessarily is needed for to run a TLAS. So as Dave has talked about the Romania system, that does not specifically come with a legality statement. Why I understand the Gabon system does come with a legality statement. So maybe it depends on the purpose. So what have we done, or what data have we used? We used 3 layers of data. So we elevated technical data, being that de facto or de jure information about the TLAS. So these are the characteristics of a TLAS on technical terms, and we found 126 indicators. We have a second layer that's implementation data. So the question here is, how well is something implemented? Are the involved entities accountable? Are things transparent? We found 50 indicators to work with. And a third layer is we do believe that you can understand the functioning of a TLAS or how well it's functioning only if you know the concerns that are in a country. Because if there are no concerns regarding specific topics, the TLAS does not need to work regarding these concerns. In many countries, we do not have even a TLAS overall. So maybe that one of the reasons is because there is no justification to start such a TLAS. So we took into account the concerns. How does it look in concrete ways? So here's our indicator catalog. I want to pick out one indicator. So what type of data is provided to stakeholders on individual transactions? And then we ask the experts when they provide data to give us a description of how the TLAS is set up regarding their question, and that they assign one specific value to that indicator. So here you see the answering options that we came up. And please do not now discuss the specific wording of the options. The issue is just that we provide these options. They should now be obviously reasonable for that question. And then we were able also to rank these options in terms of their strength. The technical strength. So that gives us now the opportunity to develop a fit for concern value. So this is the concern value in the country. So concerns regarding timber legality from 1 to 10 in a numeric scale. 1 would be basically no concerns, and 10 it's really heavy concerns regarding that on that in general, or on the supply chain step. And here again is that strength value of the technical characteristics. And then you can see, you can make a matrix, and the outcome is basically a fit for concern value. So either the TLAS is robust in that context of concerns, or it's moderate, or it's weak. Let me see. Now, these are then our results dashboards, and I want to show you now one of the result dashboards in real working. So let me see whether you now see that. It's small, but you can see a little bit of the colors, and I will explain that now quickly. And it's here again, our indicator on what type of data is provided to stakeholders on individual transactions. And here we have the supply chain step, and the orange color here means it would be answered on the system level, so it cannot be assigned to a supply chain. Here we see also that this is data displayed on Romania, and you then see that as Dave already mentioned, access to most real-time verified data is available, and the concern level is 3, so it's not very high. So the result of the fit for concern value is robust. Then on primary processing, there is no data available through that system. The concern level is also only quite low, 3. So the result is it's moderate. I can then change to another country. Let's take Guatemala in that case. It needs to calculate a little bit. It takes some 3 seconds or so. And then we see the situation for Guatemala on the same indicator. So you see that the concerns move. We used secondary sources for the concerns, yeah. And you see that the answer here is full access to real-time verified data. Even though the concerns are quite high with 7, then the result is that's a robust situation. Why? Because we do very much believe that a TLAS can make a difference, can have an impact, can work regarding the purpose for which it's set up, if technically the characteristics are set right. So in that case, here in Guatemala, on that specific indicator, the result of our tool would say this is a robust situation. Okay, let me now show you that you can then also aggregate some data. And here I eliminated the countries. Why? Because we use real data, but they were not fully validated. So I do not want you to now start to compare countries or so. But we can now yet take the fit for concern value and calculate an average per TILAS element. So you see that the 3 countries we have worked with are on, let's say, paper in procedural, quite good and quite close to each other, but still we see also differences. Yeah? And then when we go to the implementation evaluation, which is the more subject data set on how well something is implemented, then the differences get wider, and that shows that it makes sense. You can compare it, so you see differences, and you see that TILASs are working differently and having a different setup and a different, let's say, level of implementation. Yeah, we would say if we validate the data, we likely would see more differences even, especially here on the technical profile. Okay, let me switch back quickly again here. So I've shown you at least 2 dashboards that we have developed. So maybe this is a quick list of what it cannot do because we got challenged regarding this. So it does not include several areas of interest, for instance, legal deforestation. So there can be legal deforestation, and that's a bad thing, I also might say from a personal opinion, but as we only were looking into what's legally possible in a country, we do not judge that. Okay. It does not assess also the legal framework of a country, so whether something is good or bad or not consistent. Yeah? We just take it from how legality is defined. It does not provide a justification for why a TILAS is set up in a certain way. It also does not show this. And it does not currently provide data or standardization of impacts and insights of impacts, which is a very interesting question, but currently we do not believe that data throughout the whole world is available, and the attribution to the specific TILAS might also not be possible. Well, it also does not disclose assessment regarding specific timber sources, private land, public land, for instance, or product types on wood, or further elaborated products, or on a species level. Okay, conclusions. We do firmly believe, yes, you can standardize data on TILAS, you can analyze it and you can assess it. And we do believe that the results are useful and insightful for the following user groups. So timber buyers, political analysts, that may include also the financial sector, by the way, which is a new group that we were thinking about just recently. And obviously also the TILAS management authorities, because it could give insights. Where are you good? Where do other countries make it differently, have different approach? We could further refine the tool towards specific user groups so that it speaks better to their needs. Validation of data obviously is key. You need to be able to stand up for that the things that are visible in the tool are right and correct. And obviously, we were not focusing on that end. We were focusing to establish the tool. Well, thank you so far for your attention.
Thank you, Uli, and Iola, welcome. I apologize that I didn't present and read your bio. I will read Iola bio now. Iola is an environmental and social activist with more than 20 years experience in forest governance in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. She's a senior forest governance expert at the European Forest Institute, EFI, where she is supporting the implementation of timber legality assurance systems. Iola also works as a freelance expert on a TILAS assessment framework for WWF. Before beginning with EFI, Iola was a forest governance campaigner at the NGO firm. In 2010, Iola co-founded the NGO Well Grounded and worked as an unpaid director for the organization during his first decade of work. Prior to working on international forest issues, she also worked with grassroots organizations in Catalonia and Galicia. She lives in Delft in the Netherlands. Welcome, Iola, and apologize for not reading that. Well, and for now, we're just going to start with the panel presentation, and I think I will invite David and Tobias to be in front. And we have around 25 minutes of round presentations, and we want to focus. I apologize. Iola, I don't know if you want to add something from the presentation or we just go directly to the questions. And yeah, and what we want to do is, if you can put the slide of the questions. So we want to basically have the panel of discussion, and we want to run in three main questions, and we want to start from there, and then we would just want to have an open discussion, and of course we want to have like the words. The first question that we want to bring is legality assurance a system or a laundry machine? Which critical control points in forest-based supply chain can or cannot be addressed effectively by traceability systems? The second question will be, there we go. The second question will be traceability systems, enablers or barriers to legality. And the third question will be traceability systems and transparency, which information in traceability systems should be accessible by the public. So these are the main three questions that we want to address, and then we can start from here, and then we can push forward. So I don't know who wants to start.
Is this working? Yeah. Okay. So regarding the first question, I guess one of the main critical control point that hasn't been addressed very strongly so far is really the entry of primary processing. I think most illegal material or wood that is laundered in the supply chain will enter the supply chains in the form of roundwood at the middle of primary processing. And the reason for that, why this is possible, is not because the system is paper-based or electronic. It is because we don't have a means to tell if a mill reports all inputs comprehensively. So within those systems, their systems are designed in a way that a mill can only sell product when they have reported an input. And they are typically based on mass balance then. And there's a yield, there's problems with that because the yield varies very strongly over time. And the system's always defined like a hard factor that in reality is not the same every day, depending on the roundwood quality and the product that you're cutting, for example, in the sawmill. And as long as we don't have a means to capture really every truck that enters the mill, like with a camera or whatever, this possibility will continue that there further inputs enter the primary processing and be laundered into the supply chain. Should we go all three questions once? Okay. So for the second one, I think I would say that the risk that a system becomes a barrier to legality is always higher when the system is designed from the perspective of having, of an export-based sector. So if a government decides to design a system because they want to have market access to consumer markets, they will focus on that, and that increases the risk that you don't take into account the needs of smallholders and small enterprises. So I think that's where engagement of the private sector is important, and of all parts of the private sector. So it's really important. And the government should look to look at the domestic needs first and the needs of the local people in terms of raw material and not maybe not focus too strong on export, because that increases that risk. And regarding the transparency topic, I think we've learned from many cases that whenever transparency got involved and the public got access to the data in the system, they could really they could really learn, and they could identify inconsistencies and so on. So I think the more transparency, the better. And one thing that is mostly missing in most systems is transparency regarding the monitoring and verification activities. So the system captures very systematically what the private sector is doing, and there's comprehensive data on that, quite comprehensive, but there's not so much systematic and comprehensive information on which checks have been carried out and how and when, what was the sample, why, what was the sampling strategy, you know? So one good example is what OSINFO has done a couple of years ago in terms of transparency also of the monitoring verification activities. But for most other systems, it's not so easy to have this information, and that would be really important, no? So that also the public understands, has the authority really done the checks they are supposed to do by the law, and how have they done it? So that could be helpful. Thank you.
I think that as well, it will be a mix of where are we talking about, in which country are we talking about. Some cultures tend to to be less transparent because of safeties or any safety net that the trader could have, but I agree.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the questions. So I think to us, you know, the answers to a number of these questions, or all of the questions, really does come down to the transparency and the level of transparency that you have. And what we saw in Romania, you know, for example, there was a huge amount of fraud in timber transports. And specifically, you know, you could use one paper permit and take many trips using that same paper permit. Once you made that digital, then they were still getting around it. They would sort of fill in the information on the permit, but they wouldn't hit send. And then if they were pulled over by the police, then they would hit send, and the police officer would say, okay, now you're in the system. But once it was like every person, once it was transparent, every person that they passed by could report them, and there was a record of that instance of them being illegal at that moment, that's when it changed. But Romania is still a very high-risk country. And I think that's because that transparency, you know, has not extended to within the forests, and because you have a lack of traceability, because you don't, you know, when a log enters a log depot or a processing facility, there is no transparency of that entry. And just as Tobias was saying, and so we see that for these systems to be effective, you need both the traceability and the transparency, but you also need it to be comprehensive. And really, you need to look for the points in a specific country where that laundering is happening, and make sure that your system is having the transparency in particular at that point where the laundering is happening in the supply chain. And you know, for Romania, for example, we see that they, or Gabon, or any country that I can think of really, you know, you go into the forest and you're supposed to cut this tree, but then you actually cut this tree over here because it's bigger and you can get a lot more money out of it, or you cut that tree over there in your neighbor's yard or whatever. And so that is laundered at that first cutting, that first, you know, stalking of the log pile. Whereas, you know, in a country like Peru, you know, I'd say, I mean, it happens there, but the fact that all the logs come from the Amazon on the barges and come to the sawmills, the cluster of sawmills, you know, at that point, that's where you'd really need that timber, the sawmill traceability to go from log to sawn board, to be able to really connect it back. So then the buyers of that wood in the US or wherever who are doing their due diligence have that actual traceability information back to the forest plot. So you just have to look at, you know, each system and sort of see where it is. But I agree with Tobias. I mean, I think, you know, we need to push for as much transparency as possible. And I think, you know, transparency, if it affects one company but not another, then it gives that other company an unfair advantage. So that's why it's really important for these to be comprehensive national systems, have the same regulations on every country, every company in the system. And so there, it's easier, I think, to have transparency because you don't gain a commercial advantage one company over the other if everyone's production, is transparent. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We will go with Uli and Iola, and then we will pass the phone to the microphone to Luis.
Well, I can say something about the last question regarding which data should be made available. We as experts running an assessment do not have a specific opinion about it, but we can say which type of data should be made available, or you can think about. So there can be data on procedural arrangements. So it's the rules, but not only the laws, but also rules below the law are interesting so that everyone can check what are the requirements. Data on specific transactions could also be made public. Data on harvesting rights and ownership, so where is the source of the wood, is a very interesting data set. And also I would like to emphasize data on non-compliances and the follow-up. So that is then linked to overall implementation, data on overall implementation of such a systems, statistics, metadata, and outcomes. So the effectiveness of a system also is linked not only to how much volume goes through the system, but how many non-compliances have been found and what have been done with the non-compliances. A second issue around the data then is how data is presented. So it can be real-time data or not real-time data that makes a difference, or whether it is individualized, you can see individual transactions or actors, or it's summarized data, which obviously makes it more difficult for externals to follow up on specific situations. Also, the question is whether these are reports or you can really see individual transaction or situation data. So the type of data that is, or how the data is presented is a second relevant question. So maybe over to you, Iola, for the other topics.
Iola, you're on mute. Can you unmute? I think we just have to.
No, sorry. I was trying, it was not allowing me to unmute. Thank you. Yeah. On the issue of transparency, something that a dialogue that we had while doing this the study was working with the government on Ghana, and they actually thought that this kind of assessment that looks comprehensively at their traceability system, but at the TILA system, was valuable for them as governments to be able to also put information in the public domain. They felt when we were discussing with them that often people do not understand easily the systems that they are putting in place, and therefore information would be also useful at their level. It's maybe a different point of the points that we were discussing now, but also to look at how actually transparency is often also seek by governments when they want to explain certain things and certain changes happening in the country. That maybe leads me a little bit to the question around whether traceability systems, whether they are enablers or barriers to legality, and the point made by Tobias earlier of often we are looking at those systems, but we are trying to tap into the markets, and this is often also one of the main reasons for governments or big operators trying to reach out higher value markets. We did not in our study or in our work assess impact, as Uli has mentioned. Impact that requires much more than understanding the system. It requires in-depth trade assessment and analysis that was not part of the remit, but we did incorporate a list of impact indicators in our work in case this wants to be picked up in a future in a future point. Among the different points that we were incorporated in those impact assessments to see how those systems are actually affecting legality, and where market reward towards international markets, but also how it's affecting local revenues and issues at the local level. So yes, indeed, the point mentioned before of the importance of local operators, small communities, and what is it that they are getting out of those systems should be also important to look at if we are moving into impact. So those maybe are I think the points that we could make out of our work on the first question, whether legality assurance systems would be also laundering machines, critical control points. We did not assess the systems per se. With the remit of our work was to come up with a concept to be able to assess this kind of framework. So we did not went into specifically one system or other. We also took 3 countries that had quite advanced legality assurance systems and traceability systems compared to others. What we did see, and this kind of assessment frame was allowed to do, is differences both at the objective technical level of a system, but even more so at the implementation at the systems and how those systems affect forest governance principles. For example, transparency, as Ulrich presented. When we were studying regarding obligations or so, often there is not that much difference in countries, or certainly not in the countries that we were looking at that were already quite advanced. Legislation often already shows or tells a similar story to a certain extent. But then when you move into implementation and the level of controls, the level of checks, whether the legal obligations are actually being followed on the ground, and that tells a different story. And this is something that this type of work that we did shows. And if we were to move into validation and actually checking the quality of the data that we were actually collecting, I think we could get much more information on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Iola. We'll lead us to Luis.
Bueno, muchas gracias. En cuanto, por ejemplo, en el caso de Guatemala, al inicio.
Thank you. In the case of Guatemala, in the beginning, we worked to establish what data is most important to obtain traceability. And so we had to rely on information from the source, from the forest in this case, all the information about meters and also information on transportation and on the driver of the truck as well as number plates and information that we had to establish from the very beginning. So the transformation of the product from raw material and what can it be transformed into. So all this was established through a technical group that assessed this kind of information, because all this information needs to also, well, answering the other questions, because the information, the fact is that in Guatemala, this information has been made obligatory, and so all the authorities, prosecutors, prosecuting authority and the police, they all use the same traceability system so that they can carry out any kind of investigation, and also for the judges, right? Because we are also training judges and inspectors of the prosecutor's office, and all the information is shared with other institutions. Of course, this information, only the information that we can legally share. We, as an institution, have a portal, and on this portal, we share information with the public in general. You will find everything that is going on in real time in terms of domestic trade and foreign trade. So you will find all the information that is intended for the public in general. So we have legal information shared with the authorities and information to be shared with the public in general so that they can learn about the work the institution is carrying out in protecting forests and in ensuring compliance and forest management. And there's also information for producers and for the industry. So we have established within our platforms linked to the traceability system, we have controls, and we also intend to provide as much information as possible. And so in the case of the industry, the same traceability system has an option where you can click on that option and you will find a list of producers, all the producers that are licensed to process timber legally. So we have this link between forests, the producers, and the industry. And so we have the full cycle of legality. So all players within this cycle can verify and establish with a single click. They can view what raw material they need, and then they will obtain a list of information which is shared with the producers. This is from producer to industry, and also for producers within the same system. We have a platform where producers can see if they have a lot of raw materials and they have nowhere to send it, they can find what industries are actually using the raw materials. And so it's important to realize that the data is all very important, and we try to use the necessary data so that all those using the system won't have a perception of too much red tape, and so they can easily there's a connection then between industry and producers. And so we also establish platforms
so that we can have the public sector and the private sector participate. So we can have the public view and see, and we can identify what industries are closer to in my portal and according to the products that it works and with. And with GeoPortal, I can check how this industry working, what are the plantations that are near where I can purchase from. So the idea behind this is that because everything that works in Guatemala with intermediaries. Intermediaries always fool the owner of the forests because they say that the price is very low and they sell below cost, and then they sell it for a very high cost to the industry. So what we would try to do is we try to eliminate this, and this will never prevent this, avoid this. There will always be intermediaries, but we would allow the industry and the producer closer so they can have, so the value of the wood of the timber is closer to reality, so that the producer is actually benefited by the price of the timber. This is what we've been working with, but you can go, you can stop illegality, you can break inequality, and that's what we're trying to do as the government of Guatemala, with the government of Guatemala, sorry, is to create a connection between the producer and the industry. And there should be control, of course, but there will also be ease, more facility, so that the producer, large or small, can be part of the system, because he will find a way that he will be able to sell his products or buy products. And that is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis. Yeah, I think it's very important, and what David was saying about the transparency, and that's exactly what Luis is mentioning. Luis will send later the link of the Gehl portal that he's talking, where they can link between the producer and the trade, and eliminate the intermediate, or like we call it, the coyote. And so yeah. We will take, time is running out, and so we will take a couple of questions. I know that we have a couple of questions from people that are seeing in the internet, but if we have a question here in the room, will be great. Yep.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah, I have a question for Tobias and for David, and it's regarding cost. So apart from Luis, who mentioned something about $6 million for capacity building or something like that, what did you learn on Latin America regarding cost of implementation of these traceability systems, and what are the bottlenecks for implementation? I can imagine like the cost of a QR code, they're not free, or I don't know, perhaps they're free. They can only be used once. And how does that work for rolling out these systems? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So regarding costs of developing and implementing systems, the database is not very large now, because there are also not that many systems in place, and the range is very, very large. So I think it was in the 2017 meeting we had here, we had a couple of system presentations, and we also asked about cost, and it was I think between 200,000 and 20 million, no, for different, and that was, and there was no really correlation regarding the size of the country, the size of the sector. There was a correlation, there might be a correlation regarding, you know, make or buy decisions if you develop it most of the system in-house from the authority or if you outsource a lot of work. So that is something to consider there. Then there were systems presented there that already built on some basis or some shared information from other countries. No, so I think Honduras started out the process based on a lot of input from the Guatemalan system. So it's really difficult to tell what does a system cost. But I think it doesn't have to cost. You know, just developing the technical parts should be less than $1 million. But then rollout implementation, getting everybody on board, getting the system work, embracing the private sector is also a significant cost. And in our framework, we also indicate that you know, a system is never finished, so you always have to have a budget, plan a budget for further development. No, because operating the system, you will continuously learn and see room for improvement. And then there's also an important topic regarding financing, because there are different ways to finance that. You can have external grants, donor money. You can have developed the system in a way that part of it is financed by generating income, like there's a fee for the transport documents and so on. And there are different risks associated with these kinds of fundings. So our recommendation there is, you know, to find a balance in order to mitigate specific risks that are connected to specific funding. Because, for example, if the system should be self-sufficient, because from income from selling transport permits or charging a fee, if there's an economic downturn or the forest sector experiences a downturn, you will always also have a shortage of financing, these kinds of things. Yeah.
And I think it adds as well if the government, if the trade organizations are organized there in the country, so then the costs can go up and down depending of the companies.
If I could just say something to answer on that question too. So you asked about the QR codes in particular. So I'll specify that the QR codes are digital. So the QR codes are just on your cell phone, you sort of scan it. Our system was designed very much with cost in mind. And so it's designed to work on pretty much every Android smartphone. So the idea is that the companies, the actors already have smartphones, so that there's no additional equipment needed. And it's actually designed so that, you know, it can be a benefit to the companies because they're getting a free digital management tool for themselves to manage their operation. Right now, companies all around the world pay, you know, private companies, I don't know, thousands, I would imagine, or more per year for this sort of proprietary software to manage their supply chain. So in Gabon now, every country, every company will have access to this sort of free tool just to manage their own supply chains. But there are ways to do it cheaper and there are ways to do it more expensive. So if you did have printed barcodes on every log, that would increase the price. If it's done in the right way, it could improve the security of the system. But our system is designed to function without any additional barcodes, additional things added onto it.
I'm gonna ask a question that was asked online a while ago, really quickly. So there are two very specific questions from Magnus, and they are the following. When talking about IT systems for traceability, what type are you referring to? Are you referring to a system like a database that collects data about species, volumes, etc.? Or are you referring to technologies to be used like blockchain, for example, that's already being used in other fields? And then there's another pretty specific question as well from Magnus. If you are not able to do single log traceability for cost reasons or technical reasons, how can you ensure at least truckload or at least pile-wise traceability? Or how can you ensure that a certain truckload comes from a certain pile at forest roadside?
Maybe if I can just briefly answer sort of on the blockchain question there. We find that there's a huge advantage to be gained in just moving from paper to digital. And so we just have a simple mobile app that just gets the data in a digital format in a central database. And then that data can be processed and you can you can go a long way, just be able to identify, okay, this permit was already used 2 times, or this truck didn't come from this concession, it came from this indigenous area over here. Blockchain, could have advantages in the future to really sort of make that system more robust, but it gets much more expensive computationally in particular. So that's an important consideration.
Luis or Uli or Iola to complement the question.
Bueno, de nuestro lado, considero que sí.
On our side, I consider that, yeah, we do have a situation which needs to be improved significantly in our system. For instance, at this time, I will talk about a specific case, a real case. Last week, I was seeing that an industry was doing transformations, were carrying out transformations, and they were doing a lot. They were trading with another company, and industry was receiving and was giving and furnishing to another, and they were just doing this kind of laundering. And this is very important because the system themselves it's not that they're failing. Many times you have this idea that you believe that everything that is inside the system is 100% and completely legal. No, the system is a tool. It makes things easier for us. This is a real case. What did I talked about now? Last week, we did, therefore, an inspection because the system allowed us to look at this digital transparency online. Before, we'd had the inspections, but many times we weren't able to get to the fulcrum of the problem, the place where the problem was occurring. There are many different issues, many different industries. So the human resources sometimes aren't able to identify and do all this kind of inspection. But now inspections are more punctual, are more precise, like the one I mentioned. Based on this, in this case here, we reviewed with the company which was transforming the product and the two companies that were transforming and receiving. So there was this play between them. So it was a specific action that was done. If it was something more complex, we could have turned them in. When a question about the QR code, we saw falsification of QR codes, but our system detected that. So we do have this advantage. The system emits the documents and the documents are printed out, and this goes along with the invoice for the transportation of this. The prosecutor's office, they always come to us and talk to us to review. And when we were reviewing this, we saw that there was a falsification of a false QR code, and the truck was apprehended. The QR code wasn't read, so in the beginning they believed that it was a problem in the system. We were called, and then we saw that the QR code did not exist. The truck was then apprehended, and the person that was transporting the product had to find an invoice that was created in our system. So theoretically, in this case, the timber was legal. So the prosecutor's office asked us to help, and the data about the creation of the invoice, the authorization for transportation, that's when the problem came up. So the truck was again apprehended at 10 in the morning, and the transportation authorization was 2 o'clock in the morning. So the person wasn't legally, the times of transportation didn't coincide. So these are kind of things that we look into that has to do also with the different costs. In Guatemala, in the beginning, they invested about $500,000 in equipment, in development. And these costs are yearly. We have maintenance costs, we have teams, we have 11 people working with this, we have their salaries that needs to be paid, that they respond for the 35 offices that give life to the system. We also have a connectivity cost in our businesses, of our offices. It's not about how much the system costs, but it has to do with a more integrated cost and integral costs. We're talking about equipment, a data center. We have a data center that is used.
But all this represents costs that need to be assessed. And sometimes people, they engage in consultancies and they create systems, but it's a system that cannot be modified. And so it's a fixed system, but market conditions change, legislation changes. And so what we do in our case, we receive consultancies, we receive the codes from all the systems, we rely on a team that maintains the codes, and this needs to be constantly improved. Today, we are engaged in another consultancy with the support of cooperation. We are working on the second version of the system with more improvements and better conditions. So all this comes out of all the lessons learned from 2014 until now.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you all for participating, and Iola, Uli for being online, and Luis. This was very interesting. Luis, I'm sorry to cut you off. We are 15 minutes behind, 16, and we're happy to continue having this conversation. Luis, information, it's there. If somebody wants to ask him a question, we will send the link of what Luis was talking, and Iola and Ulrich as well. For the people that is here we will be continue having the conversation in the happy hour. And so I hope that you guys join us. I appreciate for the attendance and for our participants. I appreciate it. And thank you very much.